Hello again. I'm continuing the story of the Abel Tasman wreck from Pat Eadie's diaries. Hope you're fascinated. I am. Anyway, a Mr. Craddock from Westport made it on to the company, but was too late to be involved in the carve-up. In fact, I remember Father saying he was out of his league when associating with the town sharks, the biggest of all being Mick Howson. I heard that more than one businessman say to Father that if there were a few more wrecks like this one, they could all retire. It is interesting to note that when the accident came to be investigated and the reason for the ship breaking away from its moorings, no evidence could be found to incriminate a third party. The ship's owners usually came under suspicion in such cases, but as the owners were located in Melbourne and paid out by the insurance company within a week of it becoming wrecked, in fact, faster than the ink could dry on the local papers, the upriver hawser had been released or severed or unbuttoned from the bollard. This was never established because as the ship was about to depart on the high tide within an hour and a half, the ship must have had applied full power to loosen the upstream hawser. All that resulted from the investigation was a complimentary words for the wharf worker who, in seeing the front break from the bollard, released the rear hawser so that the ship would not end up crashing into the colliers moored downstream. You can see that Mick Howson was instrumental at getting to grips with effectively cannibalising the wreck. While Jack and his harbour board team from the workshops were cutting a hole in the side of the Abel Tasman, Mick had been to Wellington and sold the timber to the Government Minister of Supply, Roading and Transport, with an agreement that as each rail wagon, the UB was loaded and run across the weighbridge onto the wharf, a cheque for the timber would be paid into the Bank of New Zealand, boosting the Greymouth Company assets. This was a tangible sign that Mick had made the scheme work. It seemed that the majority of phone calls coming to Hannon and Seddon, the solicitors, was to appraise the company funds, which at that time was a normal event, as opposed to funds not being transparent. The whole 10 foot by 15 foot was cut into the side of Abel Tasman as the very rickety rail bridge was extended from the furthest point that had so far been constructed to get the quarry rock to the riverside of the tip head. The little red engine, steam-powered, was supplemented by a diesel version that the Dispatch foundry had made for the Ogilvy sawmills, and who agreed to subcontract this to the harbour board for the month or two to recover the loot. A bush winch, also destined for Ogilvy's, was used to pull a dolly back and forth over this rickety rail link to the Abel Tasman. First off on the dolly was Mick's bales of hides, about 500. These were brought to the winch side and from there loaded onto a horse and dray of Hooker Hales, who took them to Mick's hideout in his hides yard in Park Street. This paved the way for the heavier timber coming out on the dolly to be transshipped to the harbour board's flat-decked rail trucks and hauled the 3.5 miles to the quarry. This was a time-consuming part of the operation, but was fitted in well with the further transshipment of the wood onto the UBs and made ready to be weighed, and so become the income-related part of the operation. There were 3 sawmills in the Colquhoun region that were on short time, so the few from each mill came to Greymouth, stayed at Kellybegs among other places, and worked 12-hour days transshipping the timber in the Cobden quarry from the harbour board flat-deck rail wagons onto the UBs. The whole of life in a small town became bustling with more attention paid to how many UBs of timber had been processed day by day. Lights in the quarry and portable generators and lights at the wreck had many sightseers on the various sites. Alfie had to kill off nearly all of his stock of poultry to supply the extra demand. That meant hiring a truck and making calls on the poultry farmers as far south as Ross and Whataroa. The council-owned abattoir increased its operational hours to supply the demand. The whole town focused on the able Tasman over that next few months. Once the hides were safely under cover, Mick looked on the rest as a technical exercise. Men who worked on the job were paid at 3 times their normal rate, and on Saturday and Sundays that would be double the inflated rate. So many times I heard Father say he had never seen timber and machinery moved so fast and with so few personal injuries. The quarry manager and many of the harbour board staff who were in premises in Gresson Street became tallymen at the wreck site and the quarry. The football practice sessions and many of the weekend games were postponed until the able Tasman had been dismantled. After the timber had been taken and the fixtures and fittings been lynched by unofficial nocturnal raids, mainly from the Cobdeners who considered that wrecks on their backyard would financially improve their lot with having to fork out manual labour to be so involved. Things settled down to become a normal paced dismantling job. Hey, this is fascinating. I'll leave it there for now. Cheerio.